Namaste everyone. Welcome to the 10th episode of Samvadah. We are joined once again with Bede, who's a practicing psychotherapist from Australia and also a student of Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji. And Bede spent some time with Swamiji in the ashram as well, studying Vedanta. And so today we'll be continuing our discussion on the theme of Vedanta and Psychology. So Bede, if you would like to proceed.
Okay, I think what I want to talk about is a most interesting subject to me, and that is, what does it mean to be transformed through knowledge? In other words, by the means of knowledge. And this is a very interesting thing because what we're going to be talking about is the actual the core, like what actually Vedanta is. See, Vedanta is, the nature of Vedanta is that it is a means to bring about knowledge, a means. In other words, and for Swami Dayananda, knowledge is being able to see what is. Now, most people will say, well, yeah, but I already see what is. And this is where the problem is. We don't. And so what we're dealing with is a subject called epistemology. Now, epistemology is it's the study of what is the nature of knowledge and what is its range. What is its range? Now, normally in our West, because we're steeped in scientific materialism, the range of knowledge is exclusively what the senses show us and what we think. Finish. So it's like we're enclosed, our notion of what knowledge is and its range. You cannot be aware of anything other than what your senses show you. And your ideas about what your senses show you, finish. That's knowledge. That's it. But what Vedanta is it's a means which enables a recognition to open up in you. In other words, a new way of seeing. But this way of seeing is different than, for example, I've got past experience based on my senses and what's happened to me. Okay. And that obtains in me today as a way of seeing. But this way of seeing is based on the past. And also, most in terms of when I think of who I am, based on ignorance. So most of our so-called knowledge is based on ignorance and past conditioning. Whereas what we're talking about is the arising in us of a way of seeing that arises with our contact with reality. See the difference? Okay, so first of all, we'll look at so when we're looking at we're going to look at what is the way of seeing we're normally enclosed in, and then we'll have a look at what Vedanta does concerning that. Okay, so what happens is we have a thing called conditioning. Now, our conditioning has been brought about by the conditions which we've lived within. Okay, so the result of conditions. Okay, so, and what happens is in our life, we fundamentally have built into us ideas about who we are, what the world is, and what God is. Even if I've got an idea God doesn't exist, that's basically we have these three areas of life we've already got ideas about. They're not our ideas, they've been built into us. Okay, so what happens is that when I look at myself, how many people do you know who look at themselves and worry about themselves and think about themselves?
Every single person.
Yes. Now, this is in Vedanta. This is called self-objectification. I can never look at myself, actually. because every notion I have about myself is a delusion. So when I look at myself as a loser, I'm not looking at myself. I'm looking at an idea that I have of myself, and then I'm either getting upset about it or not. But it's not the idea I have of myself I take to be my life and being, for example. But it's just exactly like a snake in a rope. I'm not looking at myself. I'm not, what I'm doing is I'm creating an object that I take to be myself. So when some people, for example, say, I'm lonely, they're having an experience of themselves, aren't they?
Correct, yes.
However, the basis of it is it's a conclusion that turns into an experience. I'm lonely. So the very way of seeing becomes active in me as a way of seeing, and then it's transformed into a way of into an experience of myself that I take to be true.
Yes.
But as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at reality. I'm an idiot. I'm feeling and experiencing myself as this thing, idiot.
Right.
Or magnificent. It doesn't matter, because for Swami Dayananda, every notion I have of myself is a delusion. Every notion I have of myself. And also when I look at the world, I look at the world and I go, the world's this, it's that. You know how we use the verb to be. The world is. It sucks. It's a horrible place. It's a wonderful place. When I look at the world, these ideas I have about life, what life is like, automatically comes into operation as a way of seeing based on past experiences. Like, for example, if I say, what's your name? What happens, Prashant? If I say, what is your name?
Spontaneous, you respond, Prashant.
Yeah, now that's very useful to have a name like that, right? But the thing is that our great difficulty is our ways of seeing are ways of being. So if I see you as an SOB, it's not just simply, it obtains in me as a way of seeing. I'm seeing you that way, and therefore I'm being in a certain way.
Right.
So if I don't like you, that's going to affect the way I see you, my whole manner with you, everything, because my way of seeing is my way of being.
Yes.
And with human beings, when we look at ourselves, when we look at other people, and we look at the world, our conditioning comes into operation immediately. What Swami Dayananda called judgments, actually. We have judgment. So we judge. This is that, I'm this, they are that, the world's this. But there's no actual seeing. So when I'm looking at a snake, I'm having the experience. As far as I'm concerned, I think that I'm actually alive to what is. Would that be true?
Yes.
And so I have no idea that I'm delusional. I'm enclosed in a delusion that I take to be true.
Yes.
So I've got a notion that is determining my experience of what the reality I'm looking at.
So then that also raises a question that when we say seeing reality in an objective sense,
Yep.
even our sense of what we see reality as is conditioned by all of our past. So
Quite.
the seeing is kind of like colored because we've got lenses in front of the eyes.
Absolutely, yes. There's no contact with reality.
Right.
I've got a contact with my thoughts about reality. So I have thoughts about reality, and these thoughts determine the actual experience I'm having of myself, of the world, and of God. So I'm kind of like caught in an epistemological enclosure. My range of knowledge is reduced entirely to my senses and the thoughts that I've had. And when it comes to who I am, I think about myself. Well, I'm from New Zealand, and I look at myself and the experience that I've had, and I've built up an idea of what my life and being really is.
Right.
And I'm enclosed in that, but I take it to be true. And then I want to improve it, of course. Okay, so then but the problem is that no matter, and then from within that, I try and do things about my life, don't I? I try and do something about my life. So I go, oh, I'll try some Buddhist mindfulness to try and change me. So what I'm doing is I practice certain things. Like anything, every action always produces a result, but I might be calmer, but there's been no change in terms of knowledge. I'm still enclosed. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm not so much, I might feel more relaxed, right? But we're not talking about that at all. So we have this subject called epistemology, right? So in epistemology, and we're looking at the epistemological issue now, like what does it mean to see?
So can I go back just to a little bit on the previous point? So
Yep.
let's say we practice these various forms of meditation. It could be mindfulness or any other.
Mm-hmm.
Its only purpose is to get the mind calm to a point where it is able to start contemplating. So would that be, would you call that a useful purpose in its own way?
Well, again, it's still got to be within the context of knowledge, as Swami Dayananda said. So, he said, for example, in his book on japa, it all depends on how you understand these things. So if you don't, again, you see, if I just do something, do you know what I mean? And I'm calmer. Well, in one sense, but there's still, first of all, our starting point, you see, he has a very interesting idea. He says, first of all, we have to have the wisdom, which is the recognition of what is. That's what wisdom is.
Right.
Then we have to live the wisdom. So he doesn't have, we're not practicing as such, like I'm going to do this to get a result. We're actually living a way of seeing, actually, which we're going to go into. Okay? Because what Vedanta presents with us is a radically different understanding of what knowledge is. And radical in English means to go, in Latin means that goes to the root. Okay, so we have the subject of epistemology, which is what knowledge is and what its range is. And we can see, can't we, that normally what happens is our range of knowledge is actually quite limited. It's limited to the senses and our mental concepts, finish. And they come into operation, conditioning as ways of seeing. Then we have another interesting subject called ontology, which is the study of being, or what is the nature of reality. For example, when we're looking at delusion, we're looking at a reality, and we're determining, well, though, that the substance of that is delusion, where when we're seeing what is, that brings us in touch with what reality is.
This might be a tangent, but how would you differentiate between ontology and metaphysics from what you're seeing?
Well, metaphysics and ontology are the same. It's our theory of reality. Okay. So, for example, materialists, they say to be is to be material. Vedanta doesn't have it has a different ontology than that. Do you know what I mean? So it has but the difference is too, you see, in the West, we distinguish between epistemology and ontology. In Vedanta, ontology and epistemology come together because the way I see is the way I be. So seeing and being come together in the individual.
That's very beautiful, because even if you relate it back to the whole teaching of Brahma Vidya, if you speak of ontology, that has its being in existence. And if you speak of epistemology, it has its being in consciousness, which is one and the same. So it's a very beautiful combination of the two.
Yeah. So what happens is now, Dayananda has a beautiful definition of faith. Are you familiar with that? He says faith is the suspension of judgment pending discovery. So in the West, we've had faith means you just do what you're told, boy, and you've got to believe. And if you don't, and if you don't believe, we'll burn you, kind of thing. That our religious tradition is full of tyranny in that regard.
Right.
But you see, Swami Dayananda never tried to convert me to a religion. What he did was he opened my eyes so I could see my life in a clear and undistorted way. And And it's a very interesting thing. So the doorway to Vedanta is a thing called, they call it Shravanam, which means listening. Now, I just want to go, and I want to show the relation. So what happens is you sat before him and you were actually engaged in the act of listening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting about when you're actually listening, all of this stuff that's been built into you from the past is held in suspension, and you have a different quality of mind because you are listening.
Right.
So the very beginning point is I have to be in an existential condition of listening, which is direct, and my mind is open.
Right.
When I'm not listening, I'm not open at all.
Right.
At all. All right. So what happens is that, so here you are, and I'm going to take one thing that he talks about, and it's the same with everything. But so what happens is he unfolds, for example, he uses words. So here is that, see, so Swami Dayananda is, what he unfolds is a vision, a way of seeing. He doesn't unfold a theology. He doesn't unfold a philosophy, and he's not unfolding religious beliefs. What he would do would he would unfold a vision, a way of seeing, and when that way of seeing that was active in him becomes active in you. In other words, I'm seeing as he is seeing. What happens is a new way of seeing opens up in me. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
This is a truly wonderful thing. So, for example, he unfolded the vision that the location of the problem is you, and the location of the solution is you. For example, I'm going to give this. Now, I can take that theoretically if I want to, but that's not a way of seeing. I get what he's saying. That's not what we're talking about. Now, can I just do a practical example of that?
Yeah.
Let's say that I'm having an argument with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I'm having an argument with my wife, I'm involved in a way of seeing, which is that she is making me unhappy.
Right.
Have you ever had that way of seeing where you believe that someone is making you unhappy?
Yes.
That's a way of seeing, isn't it? And it's a way of seeing that you're enclosed in, isn't it? And that way of seeing is a way of being, because when you blame people, you can't help but feel hostility and resentment. Have you noticed that?
True.
So here you are, you're enclosed in a way of seeing, which is not. And remember, the whole point with Swami Dayananda's teaching is, what does it mean to be free while living? So if I'm being determined by that my wife has said something, and suddenly I'm in a way of being that I'm angry and resentful, can you see how that's not freedom?
Right.
Okay, because what's happened is something has happened, and suddenly, like stimulus response, Pavlov's thing, that happens, and bang, I'm caught in.
Yeah.
But what happens is that the moment, because I've been exposed to Swami Dayananda's teaching, right in the middle of my upset with my wife, suddenly what happens is this way of seeing opens up in me, which is the location of the problem is me. Now, if in actual fact that way of seeing is my way of seeing, that is made evident by the fact that I cease to blame.
Correct.
You see, this is the transformative nature of knowledge. When I'm actually seeing as he's seeing, when I'm actually abiding in the vision of Vedanta, I am changed as an individual.
Yes.
There's no such thing as seeing and not changing. Like if I take it as Swami Dayananda says a good Vedanta teacher can use words in such a way that a conceptual construct is not formed in the mind of the student. You see, because it's an understanding is a way of seeing. So spiritual understanding is a way of seeing, which at the same time is a way of being. So here I am. At one moment, I'm upset with my wife because I believe that the location of the problem is her. Right? So I'm involved in a way. And then suddenly what happens is, what obtains in me is this understanding or way of seeing, hang on a minute. The location of the problem is me. The moment that I'm actually seeing in that way, I am released from blame and hence resentment.
Correct.
And this is what verifies the knowledge.
So even if we go with the conclusion that the location of the problem is me, I don't even know or need to know what the solution is. Automatically, to a great extent, the problem has been diminished just by that recognition.
Because I'm released from blaming and resentment. Do you see what I mean? Because so, for example, Swami Dayananda unfolded the fact that the presence of God, that the material cause of the universe is God, which means that every aspect of my experience is pervaded with the presence of God. For example, he said, if you want to touch water, you don't have to go into the middle of the ocean in a boat. You can touch it anywhere. So when I am abiding in the way of seeing that right here, right now, as I am, I'm embraced by the presence of God, and the presence of God is away from no aspect of my experience, thoughts, feelings, sights, sensations. When I'm actually abiding in that vision, I change as an individual. I no longer feel lonely, for example. Do you know what I mean? I'm feeling it. I feel at home with myself. Again, this way of seeing is a way of being. Are we with me so far? So what happens is, so here you are, in Vedanta, you sit there in front of a teacher, and the teacher has a certain way of seeing. And what happens is you then start to see as they see. But you're actually quiet, you're listening, and then suddenly what arises in you, you see differently. What happens is what they call a recognition. In Latin, recognition means again, to cognize again.
Right.
Okay, like it's a bit like what Plato would say, we've fallen away in the past, we've fallen away, but we know, we know deep down in a way, right? And so that what happens is we recognize, we know again. So we've been caught in ignorance, we know again. So knowing, so we come to a recognition, and that recognition is seeing what is. Right. Do you see how, for example, Swami Dayananda's words, that God is the material cause of the universe, that's words, but he would always say this thing. He would say this refrain again and again. He would say, see the meaning. Yes. See the meaning, because this is what Vedanta is. It is seeing the meaning that the words, seeing, it's not the words. He would create a word mirror, and in that word mirror, you would see your life in a new way. Right. So he was not presenting ideas. That's nonsense. Western people listen to the YouTube videos and all of this stuff, and they go, I know about Vedanta, I'm consciousness and all of this stuff, yes, I'm consciousness, and I'm all pervasive awareness and all of this nonsense. Right. You know what I mean? Because there's no means of knowledge there. The means of knowledge comes through listening. Now, admittedly, within our tradition, we've had saints who obviously go quiet and who listen and who receive knowledge. That's true, but there's no teaching tradition. It's unique to one person. Do you see what I mean? There's no teaching tradition. Whereas this is a tradition where you sit, you listen, and then the teacher uses words skillfully as a mirror, and it results in a seeing, a way of seeing, which is not based on ignorance, and it's not based on past experience. Right. But this is quite remarkable. So it's like a reality coming alive in you. but it's through knowledge. It's not through me meditating to try and reach awareness or knowledge. The starting point is knowledge. So the methodology of Vedanta, first of all, is listening and then coming to a new way of seeing, which is a new way of being.
Yes. So Bede, what you spoke about makes a lot of sense. But let's say, and again, I'm just presenting the counters in order to
Oh no, please do. I love that. Yeah.
So it's just for more clarity for the audience as well, that when we speak of Vedanta, there is also an aspect of Vedanta with regards to sadhana, which is the preparatory steps required to get the mind to the point where it is open to listening.
But the thing is that the sadhana, for example, is based on still understanding. Right. It's not mindless. So, for example, when you understand, I am not going to come to knowledge without listening, then I will listen. That's my sadhana. It's still based on understanding. It's not blind practicing, which most traditions are, to tell you the truth. Right. You know what I mean? I'm not knocking all of the traditions of Buddhism, but the way Buddhism is, for example, taught in the West, do you see what I mean? It's devoid of gnosis. It's devoid of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for example, we expose our mind to Vedanta and we come to certain understandings. Right. For example, the only thing that takes away the darkness of ignorance is knowledge. That's an understanding. Right. So then with that understanding, I will then sit in front of a teacher and I'll listen. So even what we're talking about now, when we understand the value of listening and we understand that it's the precondition, well, it's like Swami Dayananda says, karma yoga. You don't have any yoga without Ishvara. So we need to understand what Ishvara is. So again, it's still in the context of knowledge. Yes. You see, the Arjuna apparently, he was a very, he was good looking. He was a magnificent warrior. He was ethical. All of this sort of stuff. But he had to be taught karma yoga. He was unfolded a knowledge of what God is and how to live that knowledge. So for example, so again, it's all based on knowledge. It's not blind. Right. We have to understand what we're doing. Otherwise, because it's based on recognition and living the recognition. So if I've come to a recognition, there is no help for me except when I have to actually, in one sense, place myself before the teaching and expose myself to the vision of Vedanta. That's an understanding, isn't it?
Yes.
Does that make sense? So it is. This is where Dayananda. Not only did Dayananda unfold the absolute vision, he also unfolded the existential vision in the sense of that understanding where's the location of the problem. Right. Even that is an understanding, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because here I am, I'm enclosed in a sense of identity that's a product of past experiences and ignorance, right? Right. That's the substance of it. And I am moving from that sense of identity, that state of ignorance, mm-hmm. moving into this vision in which there is only God. Mm-hmm. And as far as Vedanta is concerned, that movement into that vision is a journey without distance. So it has to happen right here, right now as I am, I open my eyes, right? But what's necessary is that I'm living the wisdom, that my practice, my sadhana is not mindless activity with no understanding. My sadhana is always living the wisdom. So when I sit before a teacher or I sit before, Swami Dayananda's books, for example, do you know what I mean? I come to it. I go into listening. Does that make sense? So, because I understand that's what I need to do. That's what I do. So it's very important that all of this is based on the light of understanding right from the beginning. Right. Otherwise you get this, people go, I'm going to be mindful of sounds and, whatever. Well, good, very good. But there's no understanding there.
Correct.
All right. So now, but the first part is that here I am, I've got the, I'm full of notions that keep on coming into operation.
Yes.
And these notions, first of all, even though in front of the teacher, my mind is opened up and I've come to a recognition, it's not doubt-free knowledge. Okay, so what can happen is, so here I am, I'm pretty clear on the fact, I don't doubt the fact, I'm sitting by myself, I'm in front of a teacher. Yes, the location of the problem is me, fantastic. The next moment though, I'm with my wife and I'm angry. So what happens is, what am I suffering from now? Once I know, you can only have doubt, you can only doubt what you know.
Right.
So suddenly, here I am, I'm actually doubting the vision. You see, so what's happened is, I really do believe that she's hurting me. I really do believe that she is the upset.
Right.
So what's happened is, this doubt manifests again as a way of seeing. It's a way of seeing, isn't it?
Right.
That people hurt me.
Yes.
They can upset me. So now we come to the second part, which is really important, is it's called reflection. And this is the part where because we have a knowledge that can become operative in us, alive in us, but it's not doubt-free. It can be actually come out. We can come under the sway of doubt, so suddenly it's not there. So what we need to do is we need to reflect on our experience in the light of the teaching.
So for our Vedanta audience, you're referring to Mananam now?
Yeah, that's Mananam, yeah. Okay, now Mananam is absolutely important. Mananam isn't just simply, bring up, like, for example, with Swami Dayananda, I'd get an understanding, then I couldn't understand it, and then it didn't seem to be true, and then I'd go back to him, talk to him either personally or ask questions at nighttime. So what happens is that we need to, once we have the understanding, it's like the recognition happens in this garden full of weeds. You've got this beautiful rose in the full of weeds. So you have to remove the weeds. You see what I mean? Because otherwise, when they become active in you, it can cast doubt on what you know.
Yes.
So here I am, I'm having an argument with my spouse, and I suddenly see, it just seems so real that, that she causes me to be upset. So now what's wonderful is that I'm using my experience, aren't I? Which is telling me how I'm seeing.
Yes.
My experience at any one moment is telling me how I am seeing. Now, what Swami Dayananda says is that we need to reflect on our experience in the light of the teaching.
Right.
In the light of the teaching. So I go, hold a minute. So what I do is, here I am, I'm upset and I'm blaming my wife. And then the light of the teaching comes in and goes, hang on a minute, Bede. So the idea, so I remember, okay, wait a minute, the location of the problem is me, and I know that I've fallen away from that vision.
Right.
Now, what Swami Dayananda has this beautiful term called highlighting. So what I do is I go, okay, wait a minute, hang on a minute. So here I am. So what I'm doing is, at the moment, I'm actually caught in a way of seeing, right? And this way of seeing is that Sylvia has caused my upset, and it's her fault. Now, is this true? So what I do is I highlight what I've understood. I look at this present experience and go, wait a minute. So first of all, what's happened is I'm enclosed in a way of reacting. Is that reacting, does that exist with Sylvia, or does it exist with me? It exists with me. I'm the one who's being unhappy. I'm the one who's fallen away from Ishvara's lap. Do you see what I mean? So what happens is, through my reflection, I I recognize again, I again see. But what I've done is I've resolved the doubt, haven't I?
Yes.
And I'm now making it more firm. Does that make sense? Each time I do this, each time I look at my life, when I suffer the discipline of looking at my life in the light of the teaching, sometimes I didn't want to. I just didn't want to. I mean, no, it's her. But the thing is that we need to bring the light of the teaching to bear on our present experience in order to resolve the doubts. Because if I've fallen away from the lap of Ishvara, I'm no longer composed, free psychologically and at home with myself. The real meaning of my problem is that I have fallen away from Ishvara's lap, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the real meaning of my suffering. I was under the seeing that the meaning of my suffering is what my wife said or did. So because I pause and I reflect on the teaching, I reflect on my experience in the light of the teaching, as soon as I recover in one sense, as soon as I recognize, see again the fact that the problem is located with me, precisely at that moment I am released from blame. I find myself going, it's my baby. The suffering is here.
Yes.
It's me who's upset. I am the location. I am transformed.
Yes.
Because I actually see that there's a way of seeing that becomes active in me that liberates me from the blaming and resentment.
So with this methodology, the blaming and resentment go away because the locus of the problem is me.
Yes, that's how we tell that we are really abiding in the vision, because we get existential verification. The way I am being undergoes a change.
But will there still not exist another problem, such as, okay, now I would not blame my wife or somebody who I perceive as having hurt me. And I say, okay, the problem is within me. It is within my own understanding.
Yeah, you won't like what they've done, right. But you will know that the location of the problem is the way I am being at this moment. Yes. The way I am being at this moment. I am being my psychological reaction of pain, aren't I? My sense of being and my identity has become confused. You know, Swami Dayananda talks about that we suffer from a confusion centered on self.
Yes.
And the word in Latin, confuse in Latin means con together, fuse, poured together. So I'm poured together with my psychology. That is my problem, not the other person.
So we've taken away the blame factor, but there could still be a sense of associated guilt and regret based on one's own.
Oh, no. Well, and then we then once see, this is the great thing about Vedanta. Yeah. We then understand that, okay, here I am. I'm being in pain, but I understand that what's happened. The meaning of my problem is that I'm no longer resting in the lap of Ishvara. Right. So what I do is I go, okay, where do I encounter God? Right here, right now, as I am. So I remain with myself. I place myself in God's hands, and I simply wait, because I know that when I do that, I'm drawn back into his lap. And then I'll start to find myself being composed. I'm no longer being determined by what's happening, and I'll feel at home with myself.
Right.
So again, this is transformation through knowledge. My understanding is the only solution to my psychological problems is resting in the lap of Ishvara. Right. Because that light of that understanding is operative in me, I'm changed. But what the point I want to bring about is that, do you see how important it is that I use my experience as a mirror? So if I find myself being disturbed in any way, if I find myself no longer at home with myself, but self-hating or self-dissatisfaction, and fundamentally we only have two problems, fear and self-dissatisfaction. Right. So if I notice any form of fear or any form of self-dissatisfaction, I hate being what I'm like, suddenly that is I recognize that I've fallen away from the vision, don't I? So what I do is, so I've come under the sway of a kind of thinking, haven't I?
Mm-hmm.
Which casts doubt on the vision, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So by mananim, what happens is every time I do this, I make this way of seeing more and more doubt-free.
Right.
To the point where what happens is as soon as you, at the beginning, you might get, you get lost, and it might take you about half an hour, half a day to come back.
Yes.
Does that make sense? But once it's doubt-free, as soon as you're in the argument, as soon as you say, oh, hold it, and it's just gone. Because then now it's doubt-free knowledge. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But it's because not only have I received the vision from the teacher, the teaching, but I reflect on my experience in the light of the vision all of the time. When I notice that I use my experience, if you like, my experience is telling me if I'm unhappy, if I feel lonely, for example, I don't lie about the fact that I'm feeling lonely. I understand that I'm feeling lonely, but the meaning of that loneliness is, I'm no longer right here, right there at the moment. I'm not actually resting in the lap of God. Right. That's a wonderful recognition, isn't it?
Yes.
So I understand that experience, and now I reflect on that experience in the light of the teaching. So I highlight the fact that, wait a minute, whether I like it or not, I'm always embraced by the presence of God. So I shift my attention. In the face of this experience, I go, let's have a look at this. And then what Swami Dayananda says is that what you do is you use the words of the teacher to see what they were seeing without thinking.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? So I'm reflecting on my experience. I'm highlighting, I'm bringing the knowledge to bear on my present experience. And what happens is I'm lifted out of that experience by abiding in the vision.
Right.
Are you with me? This is the power of knowledge. This is unbelievable, right? And it's very necessary. It's no good just simply, oh, okay, I've come to a recognition while I'm in the Vedanta class. That is not, that opens up the first stage. It is knowledge, but it's not doubt-free knowledge, is it?
Right, that's right.
So I've got various ideas and notions that are very strong, that have been built into me, that tend to predominate and make me blind. Is that true?
True.
So now what I'm doing is I'm reflecting on my life in the light of the teaching. And I can decide to do that, can't I? Because the spiritual understanding, because I understand the value of knowledge, and I understand that I am transformed through knowledge alone. Get that? I understand that I'm transformed through knowledge alone. So this is not something that I do. I'm not trying to change myself through my thinking or my action. You with me? I understand that what I need to do is I need to see, I need to abide in the wisdom, and then I need to live the wisdom. All right? And so what happens is, as we keep doing this, what happens is that this knowledge becomes more and more doubt-free. So in other words, there's no confusion in my mind. I'm absolutely clear on it. Does that make sense? I don't doubt it. But just because it's not doubtful, right? So now I've reached that point, but it's still not unforgettable, is it? Right? Not unforgettable. So the first two phases, you need the teaching and the teacher. The next phase you got to do by yourself. This is living the vision. Right? Living the vision. So, and this is what establishes in us as unforgetful. I don't know what that is, by the way, but according to the teaching, through repetition, the force of habit, so what happens is, have you noticed that you can forget the vision? Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just a fact of life. So, but the difference is, as soon as you recognize you've forgotten it, you're back. But you're living it.
Yes, yes.
You see what I mean? So the whole point with Vedanta is it's an epistemological method. It has 3 phases. So this journey into the vision, first of all, it's opened up through listening, which then we come to a recognition. Then this recognition is established in us as a doubt-free recognition through mananam, through reflection. And then what happens is, once that's, then what we're left with, we find ourselves forgetting it. We just and then we consciously are living the vision.
Right.
We keep on coming back to abide in the vision. And then we're living the vision, aren't we?
Yes.
All right. So this is unique to Vedanta. I haven't ever read anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, and the interesting thing about Vedanta is it's always in the light of understanding. And you see, you know how Swami Dayananda says that, the vision is you? When right here, right now, as I am, if I suddenly see myself that the problem is me, located with me, then suddenly the reason that the blaming and the antagonism drop away is because I am being the knowing.
Correct.
So when you're being the knowing, that is what Vedanta is all about. And that's what liberates us. So just to give some practical things on this, one of the most important things that I ever learned from Swami Dayananda was this. I was brought to an understanding that changed my life entirely. And this understanding was this. You see, I had various kind of explanations for my suffering.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, it's my psychology, it's my depression, it's what's happened to me in the past, it's because of what's happening now in terms of my conditions, because I had various ways of seeing the meaning of my suffering. Now, you know that there's the saying in Vedanta, I forgot, it's from a Upanishad, that knowing which everything else is well known. Have you heard that?
Yes, yes.
So it's a very interesting idea that, there's one thing and that solves the whole lot.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I'm just taking that as a principle, but not from that specifically. But so what happens is, once we understand that what it means to rest in the lap of Ishvara, right? So what we find is that when we understand what God is in the sense that Swami Dayananda means it means that we find ourselves, when we're resting in the lap, we find ourselves saturated with a sense of composure. So every aspect, we are being composed. We're not having composure. Our way of being is composed. We are being free in the sense that there's no object. The presence or absence is not determining what I'm like. And we have a feeling of being at home with ourselves. Yeah. Okay, so this way of being is the result of the vision that everything is Ishvara. Okay? So we're relieved from fear. Our fear is held in suspension. And we're relieved from self-dissatisfaction because we're at home with ourselves. Yeah. Okay, so it's quite a remarkable thing that, all of the clinical problems that people have, so-called depression, anxiety, hostility, annoyance, loneliness, whatever, all of these forms of psychological upset Swami Dayananda boils down to self-dissatisfaction. They're forms of me hating myself. I hate the way I am. The one thing that resolves all of those different things is, the one thing that resolves it is being at home with myself, isn't it? If I'm at home with myself, what happens to the self-dissatisfaction?
It flies away.
And what happens if I'm composed? What happens to the fear?
It's gone.
Right. So do you see what I mean? So this is what he means. This is why his understanding of being relaxed in the lap of Ishvara is so important.
Right.
Because this is what he calls an attitude, which he means a way of being, by the way. That's what he means by an attitude. Is born out of the understanding of God.
Right.
Okay, so it's not born out of my past experiences or my ignorance.
Yes.
It's born out of my understanding of what reality is. Everything that is here is Ishvara. That's what so that is a way of seeing, which is also a way of being, and it saves us, it lifts us beyond all of these problems.
Yeah.
Now, once we understand what it means to be relaxed in the lap of Ishvara, we now have our reference point. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that means that when I fall away from that, I'm suddenly angry with my wife. Does my wife shift me away from Ishvara's lap? Or is it something that is located with me?
It's a perceptual issue, yeah.
Sorry?
It's a perceptual issue. So it's a...
That's exactly right. What happens is I have fallen away, haven't I? Mm-hmm. So and the location of that falling away is I am now in a way of being, right? That because I'm being upset, I'm being my emotions, I'm being my psychological reactions, I'm cognitively cut off from God, aren't I? Right? So, but it's not, I'm not in reality cut off from God. It's a cognitive problem.
Yes.
It's a way of seeing. It's ignorance. It's not a reality that I'm cut off from God. So what that means is that whenever I find myself tense or in friction or feeling suddenly through the light of the vision, I see that, it's not my wife, it's not my conditions, it's not my mind. I've actually fallen away from Ishvara's lap. That's the meaning of my suffering. So do you see that once I see that as the meaning of my suffering, what is the solution?
Knowledge.
Shift back into the lap. So I've got this one solution to all of my so-called diverse problems. Take refuge in God. Rest in the lap of Ishvara. So straight away I can go, wait a minute. And then I just I stop the struggling and the striving and the fighting, and I understand that the place I encounter God is right here, right now, as I am. Because I have the understanding, don't I, that God is the material cause of the universe. That the presence of God is not away from any aspect of my experience. So then I remain with myself as I am. And then what happens is I am drawn back into his lap, aren't I? And so the whole thing, if you heard Swami Dayananda say that Vedanta is cognitive all the way. So it's always a way of seeing. And when I'm being that way of seeing, that is the transformation. Yeah. And Swami Dayananda, not only does he give the absolute vision, there is only God, he unfolds what I would call existential understandings. For example, the material that the way my mind is, the way I am right now is quite lawful, given my state of being, given my past background. It can't be any other way. You see how this is an understanding of the factors of my existential life. So what he does, he says that Vedanta is a knowledge that covers every aspect of life. In other words, it covers what I am, what the world is, and what God is. It doesn't deny any of these things. And so he unfolded ways of seeing these things in the right light. Does that make sense? So we can see our mind in the right way.
Yes.
We can see other people in the right way. Okay, this person's acting this way, given their background, they can't act in any other way. So the vision of Vedanta isn't just, that's what you call preparation. Because when we understand the existential factors of our life, ourselves, our minds, how should we live in this world? How can we come into harmony with reality? These are all very important things, but they are always the light of understanding. This is what's unique to Vedanta. It is always seeing in the light of understanding and then living that understanding. You got something to say about this?
Wow, this is wonderful. I'm just listening.
Yeah. So do you see, in contrast, let's people can read a book. Let's say I read a book, a spiritual book.
Yeah.
Have you seen people read spiritual books and they get very excited about the latest book?
Yeah.
And they think that it's spiritual. Now, but Swami Dayananda said a very interesting thing to me one day. He says, "Bede, we're reality people." So the only thing that transforms our lives is contact with reality. Okay. Now, and how Swami Dayananda put that is, because it's there, you see it. In other words, he talked about knowledge being choiceless. If I'm in front of a tree, I open my eyes. Do I choose to see the tree, or is it just there?
It's there. Because
it's there, you see it. So the whole process of Vedanta is opening our eyes to what is. It is becoming acquainted with what is true and real.
Right.
And that is what lifts us out of our false notions. These ways of seeing that are our blindness. Do you see what I mean? So this is what happens is, though, people think that knowledge is a whole structure of ideas or a theory about something. Yeah. And then what they do is they go, "Oh, I've got that, now I'm going to apply it." Have you heard that one?
Yeah.
We don't apply Vedanta. Yeah. We live the understanding. That's what we do. It's an entirely different process. Yes. And it is completely unique to Vedanta. We don't have a teaching tradition like this in the West. Do you see what I mean? And in the West, because we've gained dominance of the world through technique and method, we're always into applying. Right. So this is why if people don't approach Vedanta in the right way, they'll take it as a theory that they apply. Yeah. Or they'll take Vedanta as a body of knowledge that I have to study that's external from me. Yeah. But, if I'm right here, right now, as I am, if I suddenly am seeing that I am the problem, that the problem is located with me, what I am being is the problem, do you see how that is I'm not applying anything, I am being that knowledge. Yes. So Vedanta transforms being through knowledge. And so it's never, so even the sadhanas and all that we do, it is still in the light of understanding. Yes. And so when we first start exposing our minds to it, we're told, okay, our problem is, but basically what we take to be our life and being is our thoughts and feelings and our physical body. We take that to be the functioning of our thoughts, feelings, and physiological actions is our life and being. Yeah. The teaching is, of course, that the life and being we really are is God. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? So we're not, so we're listening and we get a glimmer of this. So the problem is what I am being. I'm identified with the mind, sense, body complex. I see. So we're starting to see. Does that make sense? And you see, what's interesting is this. It's myself as a simple conscious person. You see, when we approached Swami Dayananda, he had a certain manner about him that he would evoke the simple conscious person in us. Does that make sense? In his presence, we just simply become conscious. Does that make sense? We would be a simple conscious person. It's only ourselves as a simple conscious person that has the faculty of spiritual understanding.
Yes.
You see, so we have to arrive. Because unless we arrive as a simple conscious person, we can't, all of the ideas that have been built into us are still operating. So every aspect of Vedanta is a means of knowledge. And so without the light of understanding, we have nothing. And what he says, it's cognitive all the way. So even when we start, it's very important, for example, to understand that we're not studying a subject that's away from us. We're exposing ourselves to a teaching in such a way that what arises in us is a new way of seeing, and it's this new way of seeing that is the liberating factor.
Yes.
Because it brings us into contact with what is.
Yes.
And this is universal. So here I am, I'm a Westerner. Do you know what I mean? I've come from a completely different tradition, but yet he unfolded certain universal aspects of life.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? That are universal to every human being, because he was not trying to convert me to a religion. He was opening my eyes to a vision of what I am, what the world is, and what God is.
Yeah.
And when we see that, when we see that aright, we have in our Western scriptures, we've got a saying, to know God aright is life eternal. So what he does is, his teaching does, is he unfolds us what we are, what the world is, and what God is. And this frees us from all these other notions that we got about all of this stuff.
Yeah. It's amazing.
So are we clear on that? It's cognitive all the way? This is not even when it's like, for example, when Swami Dayananda talked about in his Japan book, which is a brilliant book, by the way, he said that we have to do japa in the light of the teaching. So, for example, some people would say, okay, japa is to quieten your mind down. Swami Dayananda doesn't say that. What he says is, in the light of the teaching, what we're doing is we're learning to see thinking. And the whole purpose of japa is to own up to the silence as ourself.
Yeah.
So, but some people will, the Harvard scholars, Benson and stuff like that, right? And I'm not knocking what they're doing. It's true that if I repeat a mantra or repeat something, I'll get a calmer mind.
Yeah.
Right? But this is not a practice in the light of knowledge. We don't do that in Vedanta. We're not doing a thing to calm our mind. Do you see what I mean? For Swami Dayananda, japa was in the light of knowledge.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? It was to bring us, first of all, so we can see thinking, because if you can see thinking, you're no longer the thinking. Because he says if you can't see thinking, you become the thinking and the thinking becomes you.
Yeah. So
he was an extraordinary man, this teacher. But so people might think, that's what japa is. You just repeat a mantra and then it'll make you calm you down. But in Swami Dayananda's teaching, It's all about coming to a recognition of what is.
Yes.
And preparing ourselves for that recognition to occur. So when I do Japam and I become familiar with myself, I become disengaged from my thinking. Now, when I am being the silence that I am, a simple conscious person, I'm no longer confused with my thinking, am I?
Yeah.
So, but this is, so he says, I'm giving you this talk so you can get so you'll understand it in the proper light.
Yeah.
So again, if people just get a technique here and there and think they understand Vedanta, this is just nonsense. And this is why you need the teaching tradition. And this is why when people study Vedanta without a teacher or without reference to the tradition, they do create numerous distortions.
Right.
And it's just it's just shocking. So that's why it's important not just simply to learn from YouTube videos and recordings. Because what will happen is you'll just add to your conditioning. It's only through knowledge are we transformed.
Yes.
And that knowledge can only happen if we're sitting in front of a teacher and we are listening.
Yeah.
And they are unfolding the vision in such a way that recognition opens up in you. Then you can reflect on your experience in the light of that, and then you can begin to really live that vision. And it's the living of the vision that establishes the vision in us.
Yeah.
But we're not applying the theory. Do you get what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
We're not. This is what makes this whole subject entirely distinct, if you like, because knowledge actually is a rare thing. It's not every day.
Yes.
It's knowledge is not just, I've read the book, now I understand. But no. Knowledge is actually rare. We're so caught up in ignorance. I think in the Upanishad somewhere, or a story is that for the normal samsari, the darkness is the light, and then for the man of vision, sorry?
The Jnani, yes.
It's the other way around. It's upside down. So for him, the darkness is the light, but for him, the light is opposite to the darkness. In the sense that is that so. Knowledge is actually a magnificent thing. Do you know what I mean? It's where the presence of God comes active in us in the form of knowledge.
Yes.
Which is the presence of reality. It's not usual. It requires an approach.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's have you any comments to make on this?
Oh, this is actually wonderful and very well presented. So it gives a great picture of the whole process of Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhasanam, and how being alive to the vision is really your very being, because the being is not different from the seeing, which is something that you had mentioned a few times, and it's worth mentioning again and again, because somebody should have it up on the screen, like just as a sticker somewhere, that just to remind oneself that this is what it is. And epistemology and ontology come together so delightfully in Vedanta, because in the West you treat it as separate subjects, but they are one and the same. So very revealing.
Within the light of like what he says is he says Vedanta is you. We have to see what he means by that. Is you. In other words, when you are seeing in this way, you are being in this way.
Right.
And so it is you. Mm-hmm. Even your understanding of God is you. Do you know what I mean? But that doesn't mean to say this crazy notion, I'm God.
Right.
God, I hate that.
That's a
God. Do you know what I mean? There's no reverence, there's no nothing. It's a form of individualism. It is a complete distortion of the teaching. Do you know what I mean? Swami Dayananda was a very devotional, he loved God. He was resting in God. And as far as I can understand, his Vedanta teaching is a God-centered teaching.
Yes. Yes.
Do you know what I mean? The way he saw the vision was, there is only God. The ultimate vision is there is only God. We're taking our journey into that vision. And it's like what he says, it's like a Kodak film, you know, Kodak, or like a Polaroid camera. What happens is we're seeing clearer and clearer. So the clarity on the subject gets clearer and clearer, but the subject, it's not that we're seeing more, but we're seeing the one, what is unfolded is abidingly present, but our clarity on it grows.
Yes.
But it doesn't grow without mananam, nididhyasanam, or shravan, it doesn't, you need the three.
Yes.
And so the more we live it, the more, you know, the more it is established in us. But what I wanted to point out is this mananam thing is very, very important. So that whenever what's important is the discipline that we have is that we must use our experience as a mirror and constantly look at it in the light of the teaching. Because that frees us from ignorance, because the light of the teaching dispels darkness.
True. So this was great. So I actually have two questions which are not entirely related to this segment, but
that's right.
Generally speaking, with regards to psychology and all. So before we started recording, you were mentioning the difference between some of these different domains. So can you explain? This is a confusion I have really had. Between a therapist, a clinical psychologist, a psychotherapist, and a counselor. Like how do we understand each of these?
Okay, so first of all, you've got psychiatrists, and what they do is they normally deal with drugs. Okay, and normally what happens is they use categories like clinical depression, which really are an instruction to give drugs, right? And there's been studies on the fact that when you classify experience, it's very useful for the pharmaceutical companies to classify certain unhappiness, because that will mean that the drugs will be prescribed. I won't go into that, but I've got some problems with that, right? Now, so that's psychiatry. The psychoanalysts, and the psychoanalysts are Freudians. They've been trained in Freudian psychology, and they're mainly in New York.
Bede, also, as you give each of these definitions, could you tell what qualifications are required to become each one of these things? Like say.
Okay, so so the qualifications for psychiatry, you have to be a medical doctor, and then you do your psychiatric training, right? For psychoanalysis, I'm not sure that you have to be a medical doctor for a while. You don't. But it's had a mixed history, because Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, was not a doctor, but she developed all of the understanding of ego defenses and stuff like that, which was very interesting, right? But that psychoanalysis is a particular school of psychotherapy. Does that make sense? So a certain way of dealing with things. Then what you've got then clinical psychologists. Now, clinical psychologists, they are registered as psychologists. They do psychometric testing. Do you know what I mean? They do analysis. They also do practice psychotherapy, right? And so that's called clinical psych. You know, that a clinical psychologist is a psychologist who also does psychotherapy.
Okay. Then
you've got various schools of psychotherapy, right? Like you've got somatic psychotherapy, which deals with muscular armor, considered that the problem is physical tensions or psychophysical tensions that become frozen in the individual, and if you release the tensions, the person will change. So that's based on, they all have a theory about what pathology is and then a treatment.
Okay.
You might have someone like William Glasser, which is a form of psychotherapy, which I was trained in, right? That's called reality therapy. You know what I mean? So, and then you might have Albert Ellis, who discovered, who developed a thing called rational emotive psychotherapy, right? So you've got these various schools of psychotherapy that you can go to the institutes and you can be trained and accredited in those things. Does that make sense?
Good. Jungian psychology.
Yeah, Jungian psychology, that's an offshoot of Freud, right? That's also so people get trained specifically in Jungian psychotherapy.
Okay. And
then you've got, with different countries, you've got different professional bodies that you belong to.
Right.
You see what I mean? So So the difference between counseling and psychotherapy is this. This is a so-called difference.
Yeah.
Counseling is more to do with how you're functional living, how to get better with your children, get better with your wife or whatever, right? Psychotherapy, the theory is that it's going to transform what moves you.
Okay.
I don't think it works, but anyway, but the attempt is that with psychotherapy, it's considered deeper in the sense that it transforms what moves the individual psychologically. So counseling is more functional stuff. Do you see what I mean? Where psychotherapy tries to transform the psyche.
Okay.
Now, from my perspective, the greatest psychotherapy, in inverted commas, is the psychology of the Gita as unfolded by Swami Dayananda. Because as we've been talking in the past, it deals with functional living, doesn't it?
Right.
It deals with functional living. It also deals with transforming what moves people.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? So, I mean, when I was with Swami Dayananda, I said that I was going to develop a form of counseling and psychotherapy based on his stuff, which I've now done actually.
Okay.
So the thing is that, so that's what the difference is.
Okay.
So you got that different thing. Yeah.
So, at some point it would be maybe for a future episode, what we could do is, and I think we had planned this earlier on, so maybe we could try that next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at each of these schools of thoughts, like Freudian, Jungian.
Yep.
Figure out their applicability and what are some of their shortcomings as well, because that will give a very thorough picture of how it stands apart from the Vedantic notion of psychology. So we could,
again, all of them are based on the premise that the individual is real. The personality, they take the personality to be the person on the whole. They may have an idea of a real self, right? But fundamentally, most of them consider the cause of the upsets of the psychological processes. But most of them, first of all, they don't see the relationship between Dharma and the strivings of Dharma within the individual, that unless Dharma governs the individual's behavior, the person can't be in harmony with themselves or the world. And also that they don't include God.
Yes.
So fundamentally, all of them are like that, because what they do is they try and change the existing psychological apparatus.
Yes.
You see, so and even the Jungians do that, I feel, between you and me.
So I had some interesting thoughts on that. So perhaps we can maybe devote one session for that at some point. But
okay.
The way I was thinking about it, just to give a very brief overview of my idea. Let's say you have these cognitive functions that Carl Jung had spoken about in his personality types. So each personality would have like 8 cognitive functions, and you have like the first 4 conscious functions, you have the unconscious functions. And the way Jung would have wrongly put it is that this is referring to the self, because the individual is the self. Whereas the way I would put it is this could be used as a blueprint of one's mind, which is not really who you are, because you are also the perceiver of your own mind and your own thoughts, but you still stand separate from it. And so even if it can be used at a functional level to understand the proclivities and the inclinations of the mind, it might be a good place to start in order to analyze what my reactions are to certain situations. So
it might be, if something helps you improve your functioning, I'd say that it's fine. So when certain psychotherapists are realistic enough so that if a person starts to evaluate their conduct in the light of Dharma, however they do that, like is it working, that's realistic, so it's actually therapeutic because it's got reality, if you like.
Yes.
But some of these psychotherapies are a little bit nutty.
So I can
do you mean like
in the case of myself and my wife, I noticed that she tends to sacrifice herself a lot for other people, and she tires herself out. She is stressed over doing a lot of work, and she over promises things because she likes to live up to her commitments. And so I kind of we took these tests, the psychometric tests, and she turned out to be a certain profile based on the cognitive functions.
Yes.
And so the greatest shortcoming of that profile was that you tend to sacrifice yourself for the good of others. And so, it's, and, in my case,
Yes.
it was very
But you
difficult.
see, yeah, yes. And in your case, yep.
Oh, so in my case, it was that I tend to have a lot of ideas. I bounce from idea to idea, but I don't commit to one thing. I don't go in depth. And so I noticed that that's the same problem with me. Like, right now I have like 50,000 ideas sitting in my head with regards to things I want to write about. And I can say in the last many months, I haven't really done anything concrete. And so that
Right.
helps me recognize certain functional problems of my own mind. But then as a Vedanta student, I rationalize it by understanding that this is not who I am, but this is just the vritti of the antakaranas that is occupying.
Yes, but also, you see, remember, in the context of Swami Dayananda, the whole issue is, what does it mean to be free while living?
Right.
So, for example, your wife who's sacrificing, so you know how Dharma is love and care, right? The striving to be in harmony of what is, right? Which is the striving to be accepting, to come into a relationship that's accepting and then caring. So you take care of yourself and others.
Right.
So your wife's issue and your issue is Dharma, taking care. So in the sense that what sometimes with self-sacrifice, that's not taking care.
Right, right.
Right. So, and for example, and also not doing what you need to do, that's not taking care.
Yes.
So it's from Dayananda's point of view, these are solved very essentially, if you like. Do you see what I mean? Because the thing that we're asked to do is to embrace a lifestyle that is loving, in other words, accepting, because if we don't do that, we fall away into various forms of hostility, and to be caring, because if we don't care, we'll be negligent or ruthless. In your wife's case, she's negligent concerning herself. Right. So it's a lot, what I find is it's a lot simpler, because I used to get caught up in it's true, you can get all sorts of psychological notions that in terms of profile and all of this stuff, right? But we find within Vedanta this whole idea of living a life of Dharma is, and that way you live depends upon your character and all of that stuff too. You know, it comes to it. But the fact of the matter is that if you right now here, first of all, being accepting, and also being caring, that for Swami Dayananda, that's what emotional maturity is, because you're now being moved emotionally to be loving and caring. So you're and so he considers that the core thing.
Yes.
So that emotional growth is moving, instead of being moved by binding desires,
right,
which actually in one sense corrupt this wholehearted responsiveness of love and care.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? So he has a different, so these are all very good. They're useful in terms of function, or they can highlight things that you need to do.
Yeah.
Like I don't knock anything that's truthful. You know, when St. Thomas Aquinas was studying what they call the pagans, the Aristotle, and the people got very upset with him and said, how could you dare study the pagans?
Right.
And he answered them by saying, truth and God is never in contradiction.
Right. True.
So if something is useful and helpful, of course it's good.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
However, I have an opinion that there are certain, which we can go into when we next see, there are certain psychological assumptions that are quite harmful.
Yeah, we should definitely go to that. Yes.
Do you see what I mean? Like in the sense that even the idea that people have psychological problems, in other words, that the problem is centered in the psychology.
Right.
But when in actual fact for Dayananda, it's centered on our ignorance and our violations of Dharma.
Right. So Bede, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and it raises another question, because this is something you spoke about in the beginning, and I agree that once this whole thing about the problem, the locus of the problem is myself, it is not external. So I stop blaming others. But let's say we have something like the Stockholm Syndrome, where I know instances where somebody has been actually abused by her parents, abused with like physical beating and things like that.
Yep.
She ends up idolizing the parents because of whatever she went through, because it's the only way to rationalize it. But wouldn't it be right to say that for such an individual, it would be the appropriate thing to mention that your parents were at fault and their behavior was unacceptable? They should not have.
No, but you see again, for Vedanta, being alive to facts.
Right.
The fact we're not into the spiritual nutty thing. Right. The fact of the matter is that people act unjustly.
Yes.
So we have to actually not only do we evaluate our own behavior, we need to evaluate other people's behavior. Does that make sense? So we need to see that people tend to be exploitive.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Some people get off on being cruel, right? That girl, for example, she might, what happens is, of course, she might be, the Stockholm Syndrome or whatever, she idolizes her parents because it's too painful to experience that they've been quite brutal and unloving.
Right.
Right now, that, again, the way Dayananda, the point that for Vedanta, cognitive all the way, we're alive to facts.
Right.
There is war that goes on. There are unjust actions that are continually happening.
Yeah.
There is a massive disparity of wealth in the world. There is massive injustice. We need to be able to see that quite clearly without denial.
Yes.
But in the face of it, we don't want to become disturbed or become hate. We don't want to hate the haters, for example.
So can you explain like how from one's own, like let's say if I were a victim of that sort, how would I rationalize that, yes, what these parents did was incorrect without blame coming into the picture? Like how can one separate the blame from that? Can you?
Okay. The thing is that it has to be acknowledged what the parents have done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But the Vedantic solution is this. That girl, in terms of when she's rooted in personality, which is the product of that abusive primary relationship, she is enclosed in a lot of psychological misery. Is that true?
True, yeah.
And confusion. Mm-hmm. But the moment she is actually being a simple conscious person, she disappears as that personality.
Right, yes.
That's where the solution is for Vedanta. Because if psychology would say we got to work on her personality because they consider that's her. So get into memories and bash pillows and all that stuff to get rid of it and all of that stuff, right? But what we do is we resolve personality into Ishvara. So our whole solution in Vedanta is that if right here, right now, I become a simple conscious person, myself as a simple conscious person has never been hurt.
Right.
Has never been hurt. So that is where we see it a lot differently from Western psychology. So what we would attempt to do is introduce her to what does it mean to be free, which means to be herself as a simple conscious person rooted in reality, as opposed to being a personality that is a product of past causes and conditions.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
And that's where it's radically different. Most schools of psychotherapy do not distinguish between the personality and the simple conscious person like Swami Dayananda does. It's a very important distinction.
So one thing, and probably the last one, but I'm trying to get clarity on further, is that let's say a person has a starting point in their journey, and everybody's at a different level of Antakarana Shuddhi, and some people are messed up inside in the head. We all have some element of being messed up to a certain degree. Now, are there certain steps, because there is a leap, from being completely messed up all the way to being in the lap of Ishvara, and there are many steps along the way.
Right, but what I do, for example, with my clients, I start with the fact that, first of all, that you see, if I go like this to you, be aware of the sights and sounds. Can you be aware of sights and sounds? Okay, can you feel your body?
Mm.
So the awareness is intact. Would you say the awareness is intact?
Yes.
Okay, so the awareness isn't damaged.
Mm.
Okay, so awareness is not damaged. Now, it is true you've got experiences in the past that are painful. And these experiences get triggered in the present moment. Is that true?
Yeah.
So you've got a psychological content which contains a lot of pain and suffering, which is for all of us in a sense, right? So the first thing to do is that the psychological content is there, but despite that fact, you are not damaged as awareness.
Right. Yes.
You are not damaged as it might feel like that, but so I would start there.
Right.
I don't do the pussyfooting around business.
I
don't want to go gradual. Because it's cognitive all the way, you start with reality.
Okay.
And you can prove to a person, are you aware? Can you see that? Yeah, okay. So even though bad things have happened, is that awareness intact? Can you at any one moment pause and become aware?
Right.
And then I say, okay, and what about can you see the difference between even though you've had bad experiences, can you see what would be constructive and as opposed to destructive? What's helpful as opposed? So you've got the faculty of discrimination.
Right.
And what about choice over action? Even though you've had bad experiences, you still got choice over action, haven't you?
Right.
Okay. Have you got the capacity to learn? Yes, you have. Even though things have happened badly.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? So I never take a psychological view.
Okay.
I never feel because that doesn't help the person. Swami Dayananda never saw me as a broken human being, even though I experienced myself as that.
Right.
What he would do is he'd evoke the conscious person.
Right.
So I have a different. I don't agree with this slowly. Well, okay, your parents. You don't want them. If they think that their parents are bad, if I encourage them to hate their parents because of what's happened in the past, they need to see that that's true. That parents acted cruelly.
Right.
Right, because that's the fact.
Yeah.
But I don't want to transfer the blame on the parents.
I see what you're saying. Okay, I totally makes sense. Yes, it's a very effective rule. So thanks.
That's my different. Since I've been with Vedanta, the way I do psychotherapy is completely different.
Can we have an entire session just on these differences? And I could start like basically giving some examples. And we could just have an analytical of these things.
Yeah, we can have a look at the fundamental assumptions, because the West is obsessed with because it believes that the problem is in psychological processes, right? When I work with people, I want to make them more aware, more discriminative, and more responsible, and strengthen that. I don't want to encourage them to go into mental archaeology and find excuses for their inability to live now.
Right. Makes sense. Wonderful. So I look forward to that next time when we meet.
All right.
Thanks once again, Bede. This was very enlightening and wonderful. So appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.